Hey, if we're meeting for the first time, my name is Lauren. I'm so glad that you have found your way to this video. And I'm sure that we're going to learn a lot together, and I know that you're going to get a lot of value out of this class. And just this video in general, it's informative. It might be different to anything you've ever heard. It's really simple, which is the key to all education, is kind of diluting all of this complex information down into the simplicity of just a few simple steps. So this video in particular will be talking about the 5 essential steps to sequencing for any yoga class. So if you're new to yoga, this is a great entry point to how classes should be sequenced and what kind of teachers you would be looking for. If you're new to teaching, this is a really great guideline of, oh hey, I don't actually have to come up with a million different classes each time. If you're an advanced teacher in whatever tradition or style that you're teaching in, this might just blow your mind as to a new way if you're not already training with Rod Stryker or under the para yoga paradigm. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself first, and then we'll get stuck into the 5 essentials of any yoga sequence and why it's so important to have that mind map synchronistically working together. So just quickly, like I said, my name is Lauren. I'm 27 years old, and around 10 years ago, when I was leaving school, I was in a very lost place, and I was looking for, some way to control my life. And for me, that was through exercise and through restricting my food. And I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole where I'd lost a lot of weight. I wasn't mentally okay. And I started going to yoga classes because it was a way that I could physically move my body, that I felt like I was exercising. But it also gave me this way of I just feel different when I go into Shavasana. I feel like I can completely get peace of mind, which wasn't something that I was getting in other areas of my life. And as I continued my yoga practice, now to having a daily practice, which I'll emphasize is really important if you get to the more advanced stages, I started noticing that there was other shifts going on inside my mind and my breath, and my life was actually starting to shape up accordingly as well. So when we start moving away from just the physical aspect of yoga, which is what is kind of marketed in the Western world, we start to realize that actually it includes nervous system, breath, mind, what's the actual outcome of why you're going to yoga. So initially for me, it was to lose weight, but then it was no, I want to feel good mentally. I want to be both physically fit, mentally fit, emotionally fit. And then I grew into the spiritual practice. So it wasn't always a spiritual practice for me. I would probably say I've felt connected to spirit or energy for a lot of my life. I wouldn't call myself religious, but I definitely didn't really resonate with that stuff early on. And so at the age of 22, I became a paramedic because I had this desire to help people and still do in what I do today. And I was going to yoga classes to keep myself healthy amongst some of the heavy work that I was going to. And over my time as a paramedic, I would talk to other colleagues, interestingly, who then started wanting to know why I was so happy all the time and how I kept balance outside of my shift work and 14 to 16-hour shifts, and turn up with that really good energy to be able to transfer giving my time to patients as opposed to turning up to work and feeling burnt out. And so I started sharing with them, this is what I do. I love practicing yoga, absolutely love it. And I felt it was never anything that I wanted to teach. And then I had a really beautiful friend of mine in the service who started asking me some practices that he could do, because he was looking at ways to heal his back pain that his physio couldn't fix, his chiro couldn't fix. And I just gave him some simple techniques that I was learning. It wasn't anything to try and, get him onto the yogic path. And what do you know? It's like 10 years of back pain was fixed within a consistent practice of just one pose. And at the time, I didn't really have the background understanding in it. And he said to me, you really need to teach this stuff. And I was like, nah, not going to do it. It's just not my thing. I enjoy the practice myself. And so for a little while, I resisted the teaching path of yoga, and I just wanted to practice, which is another important step. So having our own personal practice first before we start preaching to other people. But eventually, it did just start growing on me that I did want to share this kind of information. It was like, you know, when you have something that's so beautiful that it almost doesn't feel as beautiful if you can't share it. And I started feeling that way about yoga, and throughout that process I met a teacher who, she had a studio and asked me to actually start teaching at her studio, even though I didn't have the piece of paper. And I was like, okay, yes. And I did it, and it was, you know, it didn't feel that out of my comfort zone for me. It felt like I'd been teaching my whole life. So I didn't get into the teaching path probably down the traditional route of, you know, you go looking for it, you go do that training, and then you go searching for studios. It was like yoga came to me, it felt really natural, a studio appeared, I was asked to teach there, and then I got my training afterwards because I figured I may as well just get the piece of paper for insurance's sake. And so, you know, for me the story was like, oh, you're a natural teacher, you're all of this stuff, and it was like, actually got to a point when I was teaching where I was like, surely there has to be a framework behind what I'm teaching, even though I feel like I'm just winging it. And I was like, you know, a lot of people would say to me, I just feel different in your classes, and there's something about the way that you teach and the way that you do it. And I didn't actually walk in with any framework when I taught. I would just go with a feeling and what I felt like the students needed. But you know, in terms of having consistency in a practice and a consistency of outcome, I knew that I needed another way of approaching my yoga classes, which I wasn't currently doing. So my training was initially in vinyasa, and that didn't provide any of the framework for me of how I teach today. I then found my teacher, Rod Stryker, which is what I'm teaching you here, is from his training. So Rod Stryker under the para yoga paradigm. And the 5 essentials of yoga has come from his course within, it's called Vinyasa Krama, which means wise progression. And this is why I'm saying this video is absolutely relevant for anyone who is either wanting to be a yoga teacher, who's wanting to practice yoga, who's already advanced. We need to start at the beginning. Like, you don't just go in thinking, oh, it's all about fancy yoga poses and I want to do handstand. Like, for me, now I'm understanding that yoga isn't just a pose. It's actually an incorporation of a whole system of, you know, breath, relaxation, movement, philosophy. And so yoga without philosophy is basically just exercise, which is what a lot of yoga teachers would be, I guess, delivering in classes. And another thing is why I'm teaching you in this video about the 5 essentials of every single yoga class that you need to know is that a lot of teachers, and probably including myself at times before knowing this framework, we teach what we'd call as a brown class, where it's like a mix of all of these poses and we're just kind of winging it and going, you know, oh, that was a pretty good class, but what was the actual outcome? Do you know what I mean? So when I say brown class, my teacher Rod explains it like you line up like all of these bottles, and we have just say like clear water in all of them, and then we put in a drop of pink, yellow, blue, green, And it all looks super pretty as the glasses are laid out in front of us. And he refers to it as, for adults, we see that and we don't try and mix it right. We just leave it and we realize, you know, the blue mixes with the yellow to make green, and we have a systematic way of thinking about it. But for like a 2-year-old, you see all of the colors and you just want to like mix them all at once because you want it to be like the most exciting thing. But then you realize that when you do that, the actual color of the water turns out brown. So that's how I would refer to a lot of yoga classes these days, as kind of a mix of all the colors. It's like we're just these fresh and excited yoga teachers who are wanting to include all of the fancy poses, all of what we think our students want, but maybe it's not necessarily what they need, and maybe we're not getting a consistent outcome, if any outcome at all, if you're even measuring that. So that's how I came to wanting to deliver this information for people to know. It's nothing that's like mind-blowing, but for me, when I came across this part in the training, it was just like, oh my gosh, now I can actually work with my students for a specific outcome, and I can go on with a plan of attack here, and I don't have to tell my students what I'm doing, but I can guide them from A to B with the sequence of 5 steps, and it just works every single time. It's like just a proven, foolproof method that we can get results all of the time. And I know for a lot of teachers as well, we can think, what if our students really want the physical side of it? And what if they really want this and that and that? Again, it comes down to education. What we usually want isn't always what we need. So we can still give students a really physical practice and make them sweat, but we can also work with them with their breath. We can do little meditations or different shavasana techniques, or work with a theme before we actually, go to teach. We can have that little 5-step framework in our mind. So just quickly, I'm going to go through them with you. And like I said, I tended to wing it most of the time before I learnt this framework. And some teachers, without doing this training, may already teach with this framework in the background. So I'd say I'd probably fall into that category, that I kind of had that, some parts of that framework in my teaching, but I didn't actually know what I was doing. And I didn't know that they were the steps in the process to get my students to a particular state. So the 5 steps are, or the 5 essentials of our mind map in any given sequence would be a theme, which is usually what a lot of teachers work with. There can be the asana side of it, so the movement, and we can work off a peak pose. There's the pranayama, so the breath work, either before we start moving, during the movement, and then after. So traditionally, pranayama is often taught after we do movement. And then the 4th one is a specific meditation that we can do in relation to whatever asana we've done, whatever meditation we've done. And then this 5th one is pretty surprising, and this is one where it kind of blew my mind. So there's specific shavasanas as well. So if you've been to yoga, if you teach yoga, just ask yourself this question: have you ever had a guided shavasana at all? Because when I started practicing and was guided through a shavasana that was in relation to the pranayama that I'd done, the asana that I'd done, a specific theme, it completely changed how I was responding to yoga and how I was advancing in my practice. So usually we get to the end of like pretty sweaty flow, right? Like if in any given normal yoga class that you go through, hip openers, twists, laterals, everything, all of the fancy stuff. And then we get to the last couple of minutes and the teacher puts you in the lying down position. They say, go into Shavasana or corpse pose. And there's like dead silence for a few minutes. And you feel really good because your body's like kind of, I guess your energy's spent in a way. So all you just want to do is rest. And that is awesome. It is awesome. But also, we can work even more elegantly and more efficiently in a practice that will set us up to get even deeper effects in our Shavasana. So let me explain a little bit about that, and we'll go back to the other steps and I'll merge my way into getting to Shavasana. It should make a little bit more sense by the time I get to the end of it. So if it makes sense to most people, we'll start with the theme. So we go into a class, we're constructing a class. Maybe you're the winging it kind of teacher like I was and just would be driving to class like, what do I need to teach today? Or what do my students need today? It'd be like, they need more grounding. They need more being more present moment, or they need more waking up. We need to move out of stagnation and into inspiration. And I would kind of work off those themes, right? But maybe you are more structured and you like plan so far in advance and you write everything down. So theme is definitely a great place to start. And we can use that as sort of the first part in our little mind map. But the theme can be anywhere. It can be overarching. And I'll explain that as well. So if we start with theme, you come up with the idea of what you want to get out of the class. So always coming up with an outcome so it's measurable. So you're not just getting through class going, I'm losing interest in teaching, or my students aren't seeing results, or I'm not seeing results in my own practice. We need to know why we're doing a class, what the intention is, and then we'll be able to scale it to that particular outcome, the theme. Makes sense, right? And then the next one that people tend to go to is like, we come up with like, just say the grounding side of our theme. We want more soothing, grounding, calming. So now we come to the asana. And within the movement side, there's just 6 categories of yoga poses, which we will go over in a completely separate video. But essentially there's forward bends, back bends, laterals, twists, inversions, and extensions. Simple, right? But how many classes include all 6 of them and have no particular, focus? So if we want grounding and calming, in the asana part of the essential sequencing, I'm going to choose forward bending and twists. And we'll go into that, like I said, in a different video. We'll do some classes to allow you to experience it as well as learn it. And within that framework of me choosing forward bends and twisting for the grounding effect, we want to choose 5 poses that we're going to work with in that sequence. So we want 1 peak pose, and then we want like 4 other surrounding poses that are going to be like the framework for our yoga sequence. So we've got theme, we've got the asana side of it. Now, pranayama, like I said, it's traditionally taught that we go through all of the movement, then we sit after class and we sit up and we do our breath work, and then we do our meditation. But what is really awesome is that we can also do our pranayama throughout the practice. So for this theme of grounding and calming, we're doing forward bending and twisting. The breath work that I want to choose to support that is increasing our exhale. So I don't have to wait till the end of class to start implementing that. I can start moving students through an increased exhale throughout their movements. So This is another really different way of practicing that was something that I'd never experienced before until I'd trained with Rod Stryker. And it just sets you up so efficiently and elegantly for the end of class. So throughout the practice for this one that I'm just constructing on the spot is that we'll do increased exhales throughout the practice. Now this will make a little bit more sense if you've practiced with me, but also when we do a practice together as well. Now we come to the Shavasana. So this is the exciting bit. We get to the end of practice and we've actually constructed this class that we've left enough time to guide them through a specific Shavasana related to forward bending, twisting, and grounding. And within that, there are certain words that we say. There's a certain framework within this framework that we use in our Shavasana to support all of that grounding energy, the downward moving of the energy. So we actually feel calmer overall. It allows our nervous system to calm down. And like I said, so there's 6 categories of poses that we can use to have a specific effect. And same with the Shavasanas. There's certain wordings, there's certain techniques that we can use of how we guide a student down a more grounded Shavasana versus a more uplifted and light energy. So for the Shavasana, we'll guide them through a series of techniques to help them continue to soothe their nervous system, to completely immerse in that, in the grounded energy. And I'll go through with you the scripting, and we can go over the actual wording to that. You can write down what I say, we can draw pictures and all of that stuff. I love doing that. So I'm super excited to share it with you. And so then we get to the meditation. And so where people get tripped up in meditation is, it's the same thing with yoga. People go, oh, I've heard about that yoga thing and heard about that stretching kind of stuff. And it's like, it's not what yoga actually is. And it's a bit the same with like meditation, where people think, oh, I've got to sit like this and I've got to look this certain way and close my eyes and try not to think. It's not at all about not thinking. So when we're educated in the right way about what yoga is, what meditation is, what Shavasana is, we can actually move into it with an approach of like, hey, I've got that intellectual side of why I'm doing this. Why am I doing this meditation? Oh yeah, I want more grounding. I want more peace in my life. I want to be more present. Okay, so throughout this whole practice, we've been increasing my exhale. We've been working towards grounding my energy in the poses that I'm doing. So now we come to our meditation. And again, there's a framework within this meditation that we work with. So it's not about leaving you sitting in silence for the next 15 to 20 minutes, figuring out how to be calm and how to just be okay with 20 minutes of silence and then getting to the end of it going, oh, okay, I did my meditation. It's like, no, there's specific techniques, there's parts of the body that we can focus on that I will guide you through that actually helps with the grounding side of completing the whole practice. So I was definitely one of those people as well where it was a physical practice for me where, I'd almost wake up a little bit earlier out of the Shavasana just in case they tried to do some sort of meditation, and I didn't want to be a part of that. I just wanted to do the physical practice, get a little bit of relaxation and get the hell out of there before anyone tried to talk to me about anything spiritual. Didn't want a bar of it. Didn't want to interact with anybody. And, I'm a fairly social being, but sometimes when I do stuff like that, I just want to go and do my practice and not talk to anyone. And so now I actually don't really I don't go to studio classes because I have such a solid home practice and I'm really comfortable in the sequencing that I put together for my own classes and for the classes that I take from my teacher at times as well, which is where I've learnt all of this stuff from. So I'm actually knowing why I'm practicing a certain practice at a particular time for a particular outcome. And I have particular techniques to get me to that place. So I'm not just, moving forward with no direction, which I think is where a lot of people start to lack the discipline and the consistency, and they don't see the results because they don't actually have a plan of attack. And it's why people like to go to a studio as well, and I can relate, trust me, because we want the teacher to direct us to that place. And it wasn't until I started learning these techniques, when I started getting a little bit more knowledgeable of oh, hey, I can actually do that at home now. And I don't need the studio to get me motivated. All I needed was to understand why I was doing a certain practice. And I wasn't getting that in the studio sort of setting. You might be able to relate. You might be struggling to kind of merge your studio practice with transitioning to a home practice. And if anything, this last year has been a perfect example of that, with the pandemic of, we're not allowed to go to a studio or whatever. So we have to make different choices. We have to make our environment suitable to practice at home. You might not have a great deal of space to practice physically. So this is also understanding that yoga doesn't just have to be a physical movement. We can work, with a specific pranayama or meditation, or even a yoga nidra, which is a lying down guided practice for a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes, which is something else I'm really passionate to share with you as well. So it's just kind of a restructuring of what we're told, what we've heard, what we've experienced ourselves, and knowing for yourself what resonates with you, what feels right. So when I came across Rod Stryker, he's an American teacher who has a background in, both of his teachers are very traditional Indian yogis. And why I resonated with him was because he had a very Western approach to a very spiritual practice. And he was able to merge both of those. And I wanted to do the same. So in life, we try and surround ourselves by the people whose qualities we want, right? We want to reflect or absorb their wisdom. So I started doing that, and I noticed that the more consistently I taught his style practices, I was getting results. I was getting that feedback from students that, I'd never received before. I'd be doing, a fairly similar practice for maybe a minimum of 4 weeks to 6 weeks when I was running my own yoga business in a studio. And the common myth, the students don't get bored. They actually love seeing the results that they get out of being consistent. And we have to get out of our own way of thinking, they won't be enjoying it if we don't have this or we don't do that. If you don't show your students another way, or you don't educate them why you're doing something, it's going to be I think it's just going to be a short-lived career or a short-lived outcome that you're getting. So you might get people consistently coming to you because they like you, but your teaching may in fact get to a limited point where you're like, I don't know what to teach anymore. I've given them all of my creative poses, my creative sequences. But what learning this framework does is that there is an endless amount of practices that we can do at different times of the year, different times of the day, different seasons, different ages, different body types, to get a really solid outcome. And that excites me. So to measure any kind of goal, we need to have frameworks, right? Which is what I'm teaching to you now. So we have a framework for all yoga sequences, regardless of where you are. So, like, even if you're still practicing with another teacher, if you're going to studios, or if you're teaching yourself, maybe make a mental note. Like, you don't have to, sit down and write down if you're in the middle of a practice, but just take a mental note. If there is a specific outcome in the practice as a whole, like, go into it keeping your mind open. Is my teacher educating us from the beginning what kind of yoga flow we're going into? Is there a theme? Notice whether there's any particular peak pose, or whether it's feeling like a brown class where, you're getting lots of cool poses, but there's like a mix of all of the categories of poses. It's not just using, forward bends to get a specific result. What else is there? Is there a particular breath pattern that they're using? So the pranayama side, are they helping you develop your breath throughout the practice? Or at all, are they doing anything in your shavasana? Are they guiding your breath? Are they guiding techniques to help you get into a particular state? Notice whether they do a meditation. I've noticed that a lot of studios that I went to, we never did pranayama or meditation. So just check in whether that's anything that you could bring up with your yoga teacher, or you could, look online if you're doing YouTube classes. Take note of whether they're doing these things, if they're including that into their mind map of the 5 essentials in a yoga practice. And ultimately, I really want you to experience this for yourself. So I can talk at you and I can tell you how I've experienced it and how I've helped guide my students through this in classes and really got the results. But until you know for yourself, and until you've gone through understanding the steps intellectually and then physically going through it, of like, oh, I get it, I actually get what she means here, it's probably going to, we have to get you to that point from hearing this to actually experiencing it. So that's where, we'll be able to get you into some classes with me. I've got plenty of classes online already, and I can point you in the direction of where to go for that as well. The other thing that I wanted to touch base on, just to sum this whole thing up. So if you're thinking in your head, what did she say? What are the 5 steps? What's happening here? The purpose of this video was to tell you a little bit about myself, my journey, how I arrived to learning with the teacher that I do, and why I'm so passionate about sharing this framework of a yoga sequence in general. So we've got the 5-step essential steps to any yoga sequence. So we've got theme, the asana, pranayama, meditation, and shavasana. The cool thing about this is, I just want to give you a high five. The cool thing about it is, like, where do I start? Do I always have to start with theme? Awesome answer is that no. You can start at any point. You could go, oh, I really want to give twists. I really want to deliver a twisting flow when I teach next, or a twisting class that I take. It's like, okay, cool. Or with twists within there, we know, or you will begin to understand as you do more learning with me, or if you look into Rod Stryker's teaching as well, you'll know that twisting has both a grounding and an uplifting kind of energy. So it's really balancing and detoxifying. And then within your meditation, there's specific meditations that are really greatly paired with twists, such as like focusing on the navel center versus the midbrain if we're wanting to do more of a grounding practice. If this is a lot of information and you're really new, just try to take the basic essentials of this class out of here. It's like theme, asana, pranayama, meditation, and shavasana. And within these 5 essentials, there's almost like little frameworks within each of these. So within our theme, we have a little framework of how we get to the grounding. Within the asana, we have, 4 or 5 poses that we've chosen to kind of link together for like 30 or 60 minutes, however long you're practicing or teaching for. There's a framework within this one. Then let's just say the shavasana. There's a framework within the shavasana that links to the asana. It links to the theme. We come to the pranayama. There's a series of frameworks in here. We do specific breath work either during the asana or just before meditation. Then we get to meditation, and there's a specific framework of techniques that we use to get the effects that we've wanted to get from the asana, the theme, the pranayama, so that by the time we get to the end of practice and we're leaving our mat, whether you're in a studio, you're at home, you're sitting on the beach doing a meditation, if you do that, we will be friends. I love the beach and the ocean, but if we get all of those essentials really working with each other to get the same result, we're going to have such a more informed practice. We're going to feel, you're just going to feel different in it. And I think it's almost irrelevant to keep talking about it, because really I want you to start experiencing this for yourself. Whether it's you experience teaching it or practicing it, I recommend both. But that's where I feel we're at now. After having heard all of that information, you'll have the framework available for you. This framework, when I started learning it, I did get a little bit confused until I'd gone over the information a number of times until it finally clicked that you don't have to start with the first thing you deciding on being the theme. Like I said, you could choose a particular meditation that you want to do with your students or for yourself, and then you can figure out the asana, then you can figure out the breath work, then you can figure out the theme. So that will be provided in your downloadables. You'll have the 5 essentials of any yoga sequence, and you'll have the ability to start to map that out for yourself. Just have a play around with it. And like I said, when we get into the asana component of this course, we'll be talking about the 6 categories of yoga poses and the specific techniques that we can use either in shavasana, and the shavasanas that link to the meditations, and the meditations that link to the asana, and the shavasanas, and hopefully this is making sense. But if you've stayed with me for this long, I'm so proud of you. If I already know you, you know that I love you, and I'm so grateful for you for watching this. If I don't know you yet, and this has found you on the beginning of your yoga path, or even well into it, and it's kind of like, whoa, this seems so simple, but it's kind of mind-blowing. This is super exciting. I know I certainly felt that level of like, oh, I found the teaching that resonates with me. I'd had several years of yoga practice before I came along the para-yoga paradigm with Rod Stryker. And it wasn't until I started practicing the para-yoga side of things, understanding all of his framework, and his style of teaching, it wasn't until then that my practice completely changed. My life changed. And this is the cool thing. Like, it's probably one of my favorite definitions of yoga and what it means, is that yoga is both a means and a state. And it's also about how we can get from where we are now to the next place. So the reason that you might have been searching for this is that, you know, you're wanting to go somewhere. You're wanting some sort of outcome in your life. You're wanting to move towards some sort of desire or result, regardless of what that is, whether it's to practice for more peace in your life, to have a better, you know, have more freedom and less pain in your body. And then as well, like, it could be that you're wanting to look into teaching, or who knows, you might be wanting to share it with somebody. So like I said, I'm really proud of you for getting to the end of this. If you have, I'm super grateful. I look forward to sharing more with you, teaching you, being taught by you, learning whatever feedback or information you have to share with me. And I'm always open to feedback, suggestions, comments, whatever it is. So I hope that we will be in touch with each other very soon, and that you did get value out of this. All right. Namaste, yogis.